furniture in the outer court of the temple represented what? What did it actually foreshadow?
The six pieces later,
And what did it foreshadow?
Israel,
Returning?
Hmm?
Returning to the land? No.
It's not a trick question.
Which one?
This,
That one?
Oh,
The labor.
The talking?
the laver, what did it
Laver.
foreshadow? What event?
crucifixion?
The crucifixion.
Well, actually the death on the cross.
Oh, yeah.
The death. That's why it says death on the cross here.
Uh-huh.
Now, this is Abib 15. That's the same date of the Exodus. All right? So the firstborn come out of the Exodus, and Christ is the firstborn of Israel. He's dying on the cross. All right? So why this is important is John the Apostle is writing the book of Revelation, which really is the consummation of redemptive history and really the reconciliation of the time of Jacob's trouble, because there are two brides in the book of Revelation. Right? One's a type of Leah, one's a type of Rachel. But before we can go into that, the whole book of Revelation is patterned after the temple.
Wow.
All right? And where did we say that the risen, glorified, ascended Christ meets John? Where in the temple does he meet him?
In the Holy of Holies.
And he meets him in the holy place here,
Yeah.
which represents Pentecost, the age of Pentecost. But where does he meet him? Where exactly is he standing when he meets him?
By the candlestick?
Yeah, right here is where Christ is at the candlestick.
The menorah.
John is standing facing the table of showbread because that's where he last saw Christ in the flesh. Passover, the cross, unleavened bread, the death, resurrection, feast of first fruits, Christ is the first fruits, and then 40 days later Christ ascends between first fruits and Pentecost. Now, when he's looking here, he hears a voice, and as we said last time, he turns around. So he's facing here, north, and he turns around and faces south, and there he sees Christ standing in the midst of the menorah. All right? The fourth piece of sacred furniture. All gold, no wood, no shittim wood, which would represent the Spirit. And since Christ is ascended now and glorified, he's in the Spirit, fully in the Spirit. That's why John says, I'm in the Spirit on the Lord's day. He sees Christ in the Spirit. Okay, that's extremely important because Christ wasn't on earth during Pentecost. Christ ascended 10 days before Pentecost. The Ascension Day is 40 days after first fruits. But now John's seeing him on Pentecost, standing in front of the fourth piece of furniture, which represents Pentecost. All right? Now this is extremely important because after John sees Christ here at the fourth piece of furniture, he tells John that he's to write what he has seen, which means witness at the cross, witness at his death, the blood and the water, witness at the resurrection, and then John was there on the 40th day when he ascended. But he says that's what you've already seen, that's history. Now write what is current time, present time, which would represent Pentecost, right? Pentecost, and this is the age of Pentecost in the temple. And then he says, then write what you will see in the future, or the future, which would represent the fifth piece of furniture, the sixth piece of furniture, golden censer, then the ark, and then the mercy seat. That's all future. So those days represent what's going to happen to Israel in the future. But the reason it's important to see this at Pentecost is because the church is associated with Pentecost. And the crossover between Israel and Pentecost is the point where everyone gets redemptive history mixed up historically and prophetically.
Wow.
Does this apply to Israel, or does this event apply to the church? And the way you differentiate the two is Pentecost is the feast that's associated with the church, the spiritual birth of the church, okay, on the day of Pentecost. You could say the birth of spiritual Israel when the Spirit is given. Right? This is extremely important. Because trumpets, which represents the golden altar of incense, which we're going to talk about, Yom Kippur, which represents the golden censer, which only goes past the veil into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. Then you have the seat or the throne, the mercy seat, which represents Christ's throne, his ruling and reigning during the millennium. And then you have an eighth piece, which would represent the eternity. All right, restoration till the Edenic promises. So that's interesting to differentiate between the age of Pentecost, which is associated with the church. Tabernacles is never associated with the actual church age. It's the millennium. The millennium.
That deals with Israel.
Deals with Israel. However, the signs that we're seeing now in the sun and in the moon and the stars are signs to Israel about the time of Jacob's trouble that's coming up.
Okay.
But the church gets to witness it, but it's not going to participate in it because where's the church going to be?
In the marriage
Marriage
supper.
supper.
Right.
Right.
The rapture in heaven. For 7 years, hidden safely with the bridegroom. As the day of wrath pours out on Israel during the time of Jacob's trouble. Where was the wrath poured out for the church?
On the cross.
On the cross.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Christ
The wrath
endured
of
the
God.
wrath of God for the church, the bride. Israel doesn't accept the wrath of the cross, so they're going to endure the wrath of God, which is tragic, but that's what the scripture says. So we see these events now, the solar eclipse. We saw the virgin with the crown, all looking forward to the time of Jacob's trouble, which would represent Rachel. But we're of Leah, of the church. All right? Leah bore fruit first, Rachel didn't. Okay? And this is why it's important to understand this date of Pentecost when he's actually at the menorah. There's a reason why he's at the menorah. It's almost like he's going to take them on a step-by-step tour of the temple, and then he's going to take them into heaven right here after menorah, because then John's in heaven looking at the actual trumpets, Yom Kippur, and tabernacles from heaven. He's seeing them as they play out in the heaven. So what the Levites did on earth was a mirror of what the angels were doing in heaven at the exact same time on the exact same days.
Wow.
It's a mirror of each other. As above, so below. As in heaven, on the earth. You see this all through the scripture. So God created the heavens and the earth. Right? And we're going to
Now-
discuss this.
The heaven is subtle, the space or the earth?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to explain right now.
Is okay.
3 heavens.
Is okay.
3 heavens. First heaven would be the one we're in right now, which is the outer court. Okay, the outer court. Once you go inside to the holy place, you're in the second heaven, which is where the sun, the moon, and the stars are.
The space.
La stratosfera,
what?
el universo, fuera.
The universe outside.
Yeah.
Oh,
No.
outside the earth.
No, second heaven, sun, moon, stars. Second heaven. Now, what is beyond the second heaven, this is where the veil is the thick darkness, where God dwells. He dwells in the thick darkness. Beyond the stars, all the beyond the stars.
Amazing.
Yes.
So far.
So when the high priest went through here on Yom Kippur, he was going into the third heaven in the thick darkness.
Wow.
Right? And Aaron is actually a spiritual warrior. The reason Aaron is wearing the clothing he is because it's spiritual. It's spiritual, like a warrior going into a natural battle. Aaron is going into a spiritual battle. All right? And when he's doing spiritual warfare, you must have certain things on. For example, the breastplate of stones is extremely important, as we're going to discover, for spiritual warfare. And we're going to discover why in here there had to be a cloud of smoke or incense, because it covered God. He dwells in the thick darkness, because he said if you don't bring that incense in, then you'll die as soon as you walk in. So he had to bring that cloud of incense before him.
Wow.
Then the Shekinah glory would appear in the thick darkness. All right? But we're here in Pentecost, the church age. And in fact, we're still dispensationally, historically, prophetically, we're in the age of Pentecost, which is about to come to an end. It's about to come to a close.
Wow.
All right, any questions about that? Now, what's also important is there are 6 loaves of bread, which are circular, and then 6 loaves of bread for 12 tribes. The top loaf would represent Zebulun, which is the tribe that John the Apostle is from. All right? His name means gift or dowry to the bride, to the church. So he's a special gift to the church, and he's going to write the book of Revelation. All right. Now, before we can go any further, we have to understand why this is so important, this fourth piece of furniture, the menorah. What's so important about it? What's so important about the 12 showbread, right here? It's very important. Why they're important. So, what would these represent? The 12 showbread would represent the 12 constellations
Mm.
Oh.
in orbit.
Oh.
Each one represents a tribe. All right? The menorah would represent the 7 naked eye planets that we see in our solar system.
Wow.
Okay, so we're seeing that interaction in the second heaven from our vantage point. And this is going to play out. Now, how do we know that? This is what we're going to look at. We know that because we're going to go to the 4th day of creation. The 4th day of creation, which actually is represented by the menorah right here, which is the 4th piece of sacred furniture. Now, the 4th day of creation is prophetic of the 4th millennial day. What do you think that might mean? The 4th day of creation is prophetic of the 4th millennial day. What it means is the 4th day would be prophetic of the 4,000th year, because a day is as 1,000 years.
Wow.
So 4 days would be 4,000 years.
Yeah.
Now, who sees this and who experiences this?
John.
Moses.
Oh, Moses.
Moses experiences it first because he goes into the divine cloud and he stays in there for 6 days.
Oh, yeah.
And he sees all the days of creation and he sees their prophetic meaning in the future. And he tells us this. That's how he gets to write the first 5 books of the Bible. Moses didn't use some other writings that somebody passed down. God tells him in the cloud. And there's no time involved because Moses is in the presence of God where there's no past, present, or future. So Moses is the only man that went into the divine cloud. So when you read the Torah, the first 5 books, you're reading what Moses actually saw and heard and wrote when God showed it to him.
Wow.
All right?
Mm.
Specific information. Okay, now, why is that important? Because the 4th day of creation, which Moses writes in the book of Genesis, is going to be a prophetic of a very specific event on earth. And this is why it's important, because each day is prophetic of a very specific event on earth. The 2nd day is prophetic of Noah's flood.
Mm.
So this would represent the year 3000 to the year 4000, because 1,000 years is 1 day. So what happened during this time period on earth? We're going to take a look at it and see if we can find out what it is. All right. Now, we're in the 2nd heaven, and God's going to create the sun, the moon, and the stars. And he says he creates them to give light in the heaven, the 2nd heaven, and to give light on the earth. So he created it to give light in the 2nd heaven, which would be where the sun, the moon, and the stars actually are, and to give light right here in the age of Pentecost, during the age of Pentecost. Now, what does the sun represent? The sun is a picture of the bridegroom, the king of Judah. Where do we read that? Psalm 19:5. Psalm 19:5. The sun is a bridegroom come out of his chamber.
Oh.
The sun was created, it says, to rule the day. So the sun is a ruler in the heaven, the way the king of Judah is going to be a ruler on earth. The moon represents the bride. How do we know that? In Joseph's dream, which involves the sun, the moon, and the stars, Rachel, which is Israel, is called the bride. And Jacob says, do you expect me and your mother to bow down to you? Do you expect the sun and the moon to bow down to you like you saw in your dream? So the moon rules the night. The bride rules the night. The moon is supposed to reflect the sun's light. The moon gives off no light of its own. As the bride, we're supposed to reflect Christ's light.
Okay.
For 4,000 years, Israel is supposed to reflect the light of her Messiah, her King, Christ, until he arises on the earth for the first time. So this is prophetic of Christ's first advent on earth. The stars would represent the heavenly host, or the angels, in the second heaven, but it would represent the Jews on the earth, because the 12 constellations of the stars would represent the 12 tribes. So God saw the stars or the angels in heaven like the Levites on earth, the angels that performing the work, doing his work. As the angels were carrying out his work in the second heaven, the Levites were carrying out his work on earth. And that's the way he saw it. Psalm 19:5 and Genesis 37:9. And if you do a word study on stars or angels, you'll find many more verses to prove this. All right? Now, why is this important? Because the fourth day of creation involves Judah, and Judah is the fourth son. And Judah is the ruler. He's the king. So this is going to be significant, this number 4. For example, no pun intended. 4 reasons why the sun, the moon, and the stars are created. For signs, for seasons, and for days and years. All right? Signs, seasons, days, and years. For example, if you know anything about the sun, you know there's the vernal equinox in the spring. There's the summer solstice, June 21st. Autumnal equinox, September 21st, just passed on the Day of Trumpets. And then there's the winter solstice, December 21st. All right? 4. The moon has 4 phases.
Oh yeah.
New moon, waxing or growing moon, full moon, and then the waning moon. All right? 4 associated with the fourth day of creation. And then what's interesting here